Hello, everyone. My name is Duaa Moharram, and I will be presenting on the Honeycomb Wellness Wheel today. You can go to the next slide. Oh, I have the clicker. Sorry. Huh? Oh, okay, great. Sorry, I've never used a clicker like this before. So to take us through a brief agenda, I'll be introducing myself and briefly the Honeycomb Wellness Wheel. I'll talk about scholarship and sense of belonging, some previous wellness wheels, as well as the context and design of this one. I'll take you through the wellness wheel itself, with some examples, and discuss when to use it before having time for some brief Q&A. So who am I? My name is Duaa. I am a graduate student in the College Student Affairs program at the Graduate School of Education. Thank you to my cohort for being here. I'm also a graduate assistant in the Dean of Students office at the Advocacy, Outreach, and Support office in the Department of the Dean of Students, and a graduate intern in the Office of Compliance in Title IX, and of course a fellow in the lovely Research2Practice program with Dr. Bedley. So the Honeycomb Wellness Wheel is a wellness wheel designed to put forth the needs of Muslim students. It's meant for use in a context of case management, advocacy, and support, and was designed with student affairs, staff, and faculty in mind. So when I say student affairs, think Title IX office, violence prevention and victim assistance, as well as other functional areas such as recreation and residence life. Okay, so let's talk about some scholarship. Unfortunately, there is largely no literature on minority students of faith's meaning-making or development. Lori Peek, who is kind of my idol, her religious identity development model is the only one that exists for Muslim students. So this dearth of scholarship leads to a lack of competency among student affairs professionals and faculty in terms of working with Muslim students as a population. And thankfully, Patel and Geis did identify 3 components of competency in working with minority religious students in general, but it's not specific to working with Muslim students. And I'll take us through those components of competency. The first is the ability to engage non-religious and religious identities. The second, to navigate complex relationships towards and within religious groups for a positive solution that builds bridges and community. This is especially relevant right now as the Palestinian-Israeli situation continues to flare up tensions between Jewish and Muslim communities despite it not being a sectarian conflict. And the third competency is to be proactive in engaging with religious diversity on campus and to be preventative rather than responsive in the student affairs field. This is similar to the way restorative justice can be used to proactively build community as opposed to reactively respond to harm. Let's talk about sense of belonging. So sense of belonging is a feeling that one matters to the group and having a shared commitment to meeting each other's needs. We want all our students to have a sense of belonging. We also want them to be thriving. And thriving is defined as an intellectual, social, and psychological engagement in the campus community. So how can we ensure that our students are thriving? Well, sense of community is actually the greatest predictor for students to be thriving. Sense of community goes beyond a perception of belonging and involves students feeling that they matter to the community, to the institution, and meaningfully contributing to campus communities. So if you think about it, we want to make sure our students are thriving, and that comes about from them having a sense of community. And the greatest predictor for students having a sense of community, to students of color specifically, is spirituality. This matters because 90% of the Muslim community is students of color. So if we want our Muslim students to be thriving, we need to make sure they have a sense of community. And for them to have a sense of community, we need to be paying attention to their spirituality. Okay, now I'm going to talk about some previous wellness wheel models. These are the 3 that the Honeycomb Wellness Wheel is based on: Myers et al. From 2000, Hinchcliffe and Wong from 2010, and Else and Delaray from 2006. So Myers et al. From 2000, I'm going to keep the graphic up on the screen and take you through it just visually from my notes. So they define wellness as a way of life that orients one towards health and well-being, where mind, body, and spirit are integrated to live a life within the community. There are 5 tasks of wellness in this wellness wheel. I'm not sure if y'all can see them quite effectively enough, but I will take us through it. The first is spirituality. The second is self-direction. The third is work and leisure. The fourth is friendship, and the 5th is love. And these 5 tasks of wellness, as well as the subtasks of wellness, are what inspire the elements of identity in the Honeycomb Wellness Wheel, which I'll take us through later. Spirituality is actually identified as the core characteristic of healthy people in this wellness wheel, which I think is really interesting. And the subtasks of task 2, self-direction, are a really big source of inspiration for the elements of identity in the honeycomb wellness wheel, particularly sense of worth, sense of control, cultural identity, gender identity, stress management, nutrition, sense of humor, and emotional awareness and coping. So this is the first wellness wheel. Does anyone have any questions about it as we go? Because if you do, I'm happy to answer them like now. No? Okay. Okay. Hinchcliffe and Wong's wellness wheel has 6 dimensions: intellectual, emotional, physical, social, occupational, and again, spiritual. And Hinchcliffe and Wong define wellness as an integrated model of functioning oriented toward maximizing an individual's potential in life within the environment or context in which they live. So as you can see, spirituality comes up regularly in these wellness wheels, and it does so in the third one as well. So physical wellness also shows up in the honeycomb wellness wheel, and spirituality is kind of a through line as a theme through the honeycomb wellness wheel. Okay. Else and Delaray have many more dimensions of wellness than Hinchcliffe and Wong, and many of these also inspired the elements of identity, which I'll take us through momentarily. I'm going to call out the dimensions of wellness that inspired some elements of identity, but I won't take us through all of these because there are quite a few on the screen. So self-worth, social identity, work, self-care, stress management, nutrition, humor, gender identity, spirituality again, and exercise are all elements of this wellness wheel that were then incorporated into the honeycomb wellness wheel. Okay. And finally, I'll talk about Bronfenbrenner's ecological model, which is a student development and learning model. It involves several layers of the ways we interact with the world. So at the center is the individual, and I'll take us through a model in a moment, but I just want you to have a basis of what the ecological model is. Then second is the microsystem, which is made up of daily interactions in one's immediate environment. The mesosystem is made up of interactions between a microsystem. The exosystem is made up of social and environmental contexts which impact a student's development. And the macrosystem is filled with more abstract things like cultural beliefs, values, customs, and social norms. And finally, the chronosystem involves the role of time. So this is the Bronfenbrenner's ecological model. I'll use myself as an example. So I would be at the center, at the individual. The microsystem would be friends and family. The mesosystem would be interactions that my friends have with my family, for example. The exosystem could include something like the cancellation of President Biden's student debt relief program. That's not something I directly interact with, but it does impact me. The macrosystem would include something like having a faith system or belief in God. And finally, the chronosystem could include discrimination that I've experienced since the time of 9/11 and how that's impacted my development and learning. So this is Bronfenbrenner's ecological model. You can see from the arrows the way the layers interact and relate to each other. And that's where the inspiration for the way the different aspects of the honeycomb wellness wheel interact and relate to each other came from. And you'll see the arrows in that as well. So this is all makes sense in a moment. So let's talk about the design. The design of the honeycomb wellness wheel came from the story of the chapter of the bee in the Holy Quran. It's called Surat al-Nahl. So this is where the theme of honeycombs and bees come from. Bees are a very beloved creature in the Islamic tradition. The way that they interact as a society and the collectivist nature of honey, what's the word? Not honeycombs, but a bee's nest, for example, the way that works together. A beehive, thank you, is something that we're actually encouraged to take lessons from as people. So some things to keep in mind before I go through the honeycomb wellness wheel. The definition of Islamophobia I use is of an unfounded hostility of Islam or fear of Islam or Muslims as a social group. As a term, it was introduced in the late 80s, coinciding with the wave of immigration from Muslim-majority countries. The goal of the honeycomb wellness wheel is to help students develop a strong internal locus of control. And this is because a lot of students of faith, and Muslim students as well, have a very strong external locus of control because of their belief in God, in fate, and in something larger than themselves. So developmentally, it's healthy to kind of help them push towards more of a balance there and develop a strong internal locus of control in addition to their external locus of control. There are 10 pillars of wellness in the Honeycomb Wellness Wheel. The pillars of wellness are the honeycombs or the elements of identity, which I'll go through in a moment. And I tried to parallel this with there being 5 pillars of Islam, which are the Shahada, or bearing witness to God and the Prophet, prayer, charity, fasting, and the holy pilgrimage to Mecca. And finally, the definitions of spirituality, religion, and faith are as follows. Spirituality is defined as subjective and inward aspects of faith, religion as institutional and outward expressions of faith, and faith as the intersection between those two. Okay, here it is, the long-awaited Honeycomb Wellness Wheel. So I'll take you through the different aspects of it first. The internal locus of control is the goal, and that's at the center of the Honeycomb Wellness Wheel. The elements of identity are what's in the honeycombs, and those are impacted by the external factors which are on the outside here. The external factors are discrimination against Muslim presentation and guilt and shame that one might experience from within the Muslim community. So you can see from the arrows the way they relate to each other. External factors impact the elements of identity, and the elements of identity impact the strength of the internal locus of control that someone has. So I'm going to take us through each of these honeycombs. Do we have time for that? Okay, great. So in terms of cultural identity, the Muslim community is actually quite diverse. It's 30% Black, 30% Arab, and 30% South Asian. So when you think about interacting with a student who comes from each of those cultural backgrounds, it's going to be very different. As an example, for a Black Muslim, they might be experiencing discrimination against their Muslim presentation and then anti-Blackness from within the Muslim community. And that can make a student feel out of control because of how people are reacting to the way they look or someone's perception of them. So when you're working with a Muslim student, it's important to keep in mind that it's not one size fits all. The Muslim community is not a monolith. When it comes to physicality, physical health is something that's important for all students, but for Muslim students, there's an added layer of it being a religious obligation or tradition to take care of your body. We've all heard the phrase, your body is a temple. Well, for Muslim students, there's something called an amana, which is a trust. Your body is an amana. This form has been entrusted to me for the time that I've been alive, and I have a responsibility religiously to take care of it. So this is something that can be helpful in actually improving someone's internal locus of control and their sense of agency over their life and their existence. When it comes to coping strategies, many Muslim students are going to experience discrimination, and I'll get into that into the next slide a little bit with some data. But they're going to be experiencing discrimination because of the environment in which we live and, unfortunately, the way the world works. They also might experience guilt and shame from within the Muslim community for any number of social identities they hold that the Muslim community doesn't necessarily react well to. So it's important to help them develop coping strategies to help improve their internal locus of control and help them feel a little bit more in control of what's happening to them in their life. Next is managing faith responsibilities. So as Muslims, we typically pray 5 times a day, depending on one's level of practice. And it can be really hard when you think about a student's schedule. They're running from class to class, especially on a campus like this one where you're taking buses to class, to find time to pray 5 times a day. So if a student is late to an appointment or perhaps late to a shift at work or stepping out of class to find time to pray, being understanding of where they're coming from with that can help them feel a little bit more supported in the classroom as well as in student affairs work. I know for myself, as a nursing student in my undergrad years, it was really hard to find time to pray Dhuhr, Asr, and Maghrib during 12-hour clinicals while I'm running from room to room and taking vitals and taking care of patients. So being understanding of that can help them feel have a stronger sense of agency and feel more supported from the adults they're interacting with in college. When it comes to work-life balance, similarly, right now we're in the month of Ramadan. This is a very, very holy time. And so people are not only fasting from dawn to sunset, but they're also doing late-night prayers, typically after the last of the 5 daily prayers. And those late-night prayers can last until 10 p.m. or 12 p.m. So imagine a student's level of responsibility, right, trying to manage not only their work schedule, if they're working a part-time job, and their school schedule, and their homework, and on top of that, now fasting and doing late-night prayers. So this is definitely an element of their existence that's going to be impacted by discrimination they experience from outside of the Muslim community and impacting the level of control that they feel they have over their life. When it comes to self-expression, I genuinely think fashion is so important because it's a way that a student is expressing who they're becoming and who they are, right? And for Muslims, modesty is a really important concept in the faith. So as students are becoming who they are and expressing that through their fashion and through their clothing, they're also trying to negotiate that with the Islamic tradition or principle of modesty. And so when you're working with a Muslim student, being aware of potentially that conflict and that negotiation they're experiencing is really helpful in being supportive to them. And then in addition, for a Muslim woman who might be wearing hijab like myself, a lot of Muslim women are experiencing discrimination because of their visible presentation right now. And that can cause them to actually take off their hijab because they might feel a little bit like too out of control in their life because of the discrimination they're experiencing. So being aware of the context in which a Muslim student lives is really crucial. When it comes to sense of self, I think of the way sense of self and self-expression relate to each other as very similarly to the way gender identity and gender presentation relate to each other. Gender identity is much more foundational, innate. Gender presentation can be more fluid and change over time a little bit more easily. And so sense of self and self-expression are related to each other in that way, but sense of self is a little bit more foundational and innate to who somebody is. At the same time, there is a lot that Islam asks of us that might be difficult for someone to negotiate with who they're becoming, right? So does their sense of self align with what the faith is asking them to do? As an example, there might be a student who really likes to go dancing, and Islam asks us to not necessarily be in the presence of alcohol, at least not frequently. So given that there are not necessarily a lot of sober spaces for a student to go out dancing or to experience those kind of environments, that might be something as student affairs professionals we can creatively create opportunities for them to do and experience. Because otherwise, again, that might impact the level of control they feel they have over their life. And we want to be improving that sense of agency that they have. When it comes to self-control, similarly, there are things that Islam asks us to do, and there's also things that Islam asks us to not do. So there's what's halal and there's what's haram. And one of the things that a student might be practicing is observing the practice of not drinking alcohol, or the tradition of not drinking alcohol. And I think we can, acknowledge that a lot of campus norms do surround drinking in terms of the culture that undergrads might create. And so when it comes to a student trying to access that sense of belonging and sense of community, but not necessarily fitting into campus norms or campus culture that their peers are fitting into, it's important for us to be creative to help them have that sense of agency and, again, create opportunities for them to access sense of belonging and sense of community without necessarily violating their own personal boundaries or the importance of faith to them. And finally, gender and sexuality. I do talk about them together because there is unfortunately a lot of homophobia and transphobia within the Muslim community and many religious communities. And so for a student who is queer and Muslim, it's super, super important as student affairs professionals and faculty to be supportive of both of those identities. There are a lot of Muslims that are told that they have to choose between their queerness and their Muslim identity by the Muslim community, and they're likely also experiencing discrimination from outside of the Muslim community for their Muslim presentation or Muslim identity. So as student affairs professionals and faculty, it's important to recognize that a lot of queer Muslims are going to feel like super out of control. They're going to feel as if what they're experiencing is not something they have any agency over, because they might be feeling guilt and shame from within the Muslim community for the way they exist and present as queer people, and then discrimination from outside of the Muslim community for their Muslimness. So it's really important to encourage them to show up as who they are, to love and respect themselves and have that pride. And that might be something that they're not getting from a lot of places, and it can really make a difference in a student's trajectory and emotional and academic journey at school. And finally, when it comes to gender identity, the stereotypes and the discrimination that people are subject to as Muslim students does vary based on their gender identity. A lot of Muslim women are pitied and considered to be weak and meek, and Muslim men are much more likely to be stereotyped as being violent or being terrorists or being angry men. And so being aware of the context in which students are experiencing discrimination is also really helpful to understand how that might be impacting their sense of agency. So that is the Honeycomb Wellness Wheel. I'll take us through briefly when to use it. So one of the times that it's helpful to use this tool is when there is a lack of institutional support for Muslim students. And as I mentioned, There is a lack of research and theory supporting Muslim students, so the lack of competency that is present in the field is really important for us to recognize, and hopefully this tool will help fill that gap. Another time is when there's heightened Islamophobia. The Council on American Islamic Relations released that there were 1,283 bias cases submitted in October alone, let alone since then. And research shows that the discrimination that is occurring right now against Muslim students is on par with post 9/11. So hopefully this will be a useful tool for you all. And finally, during significant religious and cultural moments such as Ramadan, we're actually in the last 10 days, so it's the most holy time, great time to use this, and Eid, which is coming up soon and will soon be in the academic year on a regular basis. Okay, so if there are any questions, thank you so much for listening. This would be the time.
Shout out to Crystal for this dress that I will be stealing and will be showing up as her twin. Oh, you know how much I love this. This formulation of how we show up in support, what support look like, and the particular infusion of Islamic principles into this practice. Someone will ask you, right? So let's first enter Muslim students because that's who it's for. Some folks will ask you, how might folks who are looking to support students who are not Muslim but who are otherwise minoritized find utility in your instrument? And so I'm fascinated in that, but before I do that, remember that because I will forget it. I'm so proud of you in this work.
Thank you.
This work comes out of where you are in your actual career and seeing the need for it. And as a student affairs girly through and through to my core, I love when folks are continuing to build on the literature that is present, seeing a need for a tool and practice in doing it. And so as you go out, as you have the webinar, as you do the podcast, when you move into your job, when people are reaching out to you as a person who crafted and coined this framework, remember where this work comes from. And when the next person reaches out to you and says, I want to add on to this, how you'll be able to mentor and show them through the process. So I'm super proud of you for that. So back to the practitioner who's like, I don't really have Muslim students, but I have students who are otherwise minoritized. How might I find utility in your work? What might you say to them?
I think a lot of this does apply to minoritized religious students in general. Yep. And so I think like the cultural identity piece is super applicable. A lot of religious communities are really diverse. And many of them do face discrimination because of their presentation, right? I know the Sikh community like faces discrimination against their perceived Muslim presentation. Some of the first people that were hate crimed after October 7th were Sikh people, not Muslim people, because there's a lot of ignorance in the American community, and people will see Sikh people and assume that they're Muslim when they're not. So I think there is applicability here, but it would just need to be tweaked to the specific experiences of those faith communities.
Yeah. All around, I'm always finding the translatability between one framework and another. But the other piece about this that you've kind of said but haven't is the explicit power consciousness of this framework and the inherent intersectional approach to it. So as you were talking through this, saying, you know, the community in New Brunswick, Rutgers, New Brunswick of Muslims is pretty diverse and actually pretty equally split up. And that in and of itself, while diverse, does not mean that there's not internal shenanigans happening.
Oh,
and so
yeah.
being able to name it, right, for folks who may believe, oh, if I have this one model, I can do anything, if they don't understand the inherent nuance in intersectional identity work and power and how it can show up, they may go without recognizing that. So to you, I just say, somewhere in there, explicitly say intersectional or power so that folks can say, yes, you may be dealing with a student who is Muslim and religious, but racially they're this. or they're a woman or is gender expansive, and that's a different power dynamic. And the interplay or intersection wherever people are, whatever language their state governments allow or don't allow, so that they understand it's not just a one shoe fits all. This is one lens through which to understand how someone may be experiencing the campus and how you can inspire them to develop the internal locus of control. Very thrilled about this work. Glad to have it out in the community so folks can start doing their thing. A+ to you.
Thank you. This was actually, when I originally proposed this project to Dr. Bedley, I was going to create 3 of these. And this was the first, a general one, and then I was going to do one based on socioeconomic status and another based on gender identity. So this is certainly the beginning of the work, not the be-all, end-all.
Hi there. I don't really have a question, it's mostly a comment, but just to say thank you.
Thank you.
For this work. I'm sitting here desperately trying to remember the book name and the chapter name of something that I wrote pre-COVID relative to Muslim women in the world of fitness, and how this applies, because I've had experiences as a professor and as a group fitness instructor where I've had Muslim women show up and dress very differently.
Mm-hmm.
So some who were really conservative, always with the headscarf, niqab, some,
Mm-hmm.
where you just
Mm-hmm.
see eyes, gloves, everything, all you see is eyes. And then some show up, you would never know they were Muslim,
Mm-hmm.
based on the jewelry and the makeup and so forth. So for me, it forced me to begin to think more widely and broadly about what being a Muslim is for women, and how does that show up in spaces where physical fitness is the goal. And there's a lot of variability there.
Yeah.
So I can see how applying this would matter in that area.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's something that we all need to think about a lot more, and how that impacts people, and whether or not they even want to show up in those spaces, because some choose absolutely not to. So,
Yeah. Thank you so much for that comment.
Yeah, I want to thank you for talking about sexuality and gender identity. As somebody who runs a lab here on campus, and it's called the Pink Lab, it's also a safe space for queer students to do research. I've also had queer Muslim students in my lab, and in part because they also know that my lab manager is Muslim, from a Muslim family. So there's a safe space, and I think it's really important that you can create safe spaces for communities that may seem opposing to each other,
Mm-hmm.
if you do it in a way that it's like what you're talking about, being holistic. Right?
Thank you. Thank you for
Inclusive.
having that lab. That's that's really exciting.
Yes. All right. Can we get a round of applause? Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Give us a moment. We're going to queue up our
gonna take the
next presentation.